What's up, guys? So, I'm sure you're wondering where all the content's been for this past off season, but my channel, much like the MLB, is, I guess you could call it, in a lockout. There's nothing going on. There has been anything going on since December 2nd because the owners locked the players out. Now, I'm going to do my best and not getting very angry in this video about everything that's going on. So let's start at the end of the season. So December 2nd was the day that the prior CBA finally expired. Now, prefacing this a little bit, I knew come 2020, when how long it took for the season to start, that this negotiation for this present CBA that the MLB and the Players Association are going after right now was going to be something that was going to be awful. It was going to take forever. There's a lot of bad blood. And I was telling people that I thought this season could be washed out because of how much tension and bad blood there is between the Players Association and the owners. So in 2020, to do a quick synopsis of that, the MLB and the Players Association initially agreed on that the players would get half their salary for X amount of games. Well, the games decided wasn't set in stone yet, and then they said 60 games, but players don't get half paid salaries anymore. So for 2 months, the MLB and the Players Association went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth about how much percentage of pay that they were going to get. Well, they ended up getting their 50% anyways, and they ended up agreeing to the deal that they proposed in late March, early April, and ended up missing 2 months and didn't start the season until July. And 2020 was one of the baseball season was one of the hardest things for me to watch because of how boring it was, no fans in the stands. Plus, 60 games is a Mickey Mouse championship. I don't care if you're a Dodgers fan, if that offends you. It is. It's a Mickey Mouse championship. You played 60 games. If the Tigers would have won the World Series in 2020, it's a Mickey Mouse championship. And I'd have been the first one on here talking about it's a Mickey Mouse championship. So this past year, we get some semblance of normalcy. Fans are coming back. Like, teams are starting to make money again, and that was the biggest thing why they wanted to only play 60 games that year, because of the money loss, and the owners didn't want to have to pay the players all this money, and they weren't going to make all the revenue they would make with fans in the stands and everything else. Plus, they lost spring training games. So now, coming into this CBA, I knew with how bad the tensions were between them, because if you look at the last two CBAs, what the players have given up, and it's their fault what they've given up. They signed those papers. The Players Association signed the agreements in the past two CBAs that have gone on, and that's where they've lost the most in the last two CBAs, and given more control of the game to the owners, particularly in service time manipulation, the competitive bargaining tax, the CBT, and the minimum going up only so little. Now, let's start what's going on and the timeline of this before we really dig deep into it. So season ends. They have till December 2nd to negotiate another CBA without their first work stoppage since 1995. They've managed to go over 20 years without a work stoppage since the strike of 94. Now, strike, unlike a lockout, strike is when in 94 the players, they were playing without a CBA, and they decided to strike right in August to try to get another CBA. And much like right now, the players in 94 and it was a bad situation for the PA and the MLB for what they were fighting for. Much like now, where they've lost so much in the last couple CBAs, and baseball is treating the CBT that the players agreed to as a hard cap. So December comes, they have until December 2nd to agree to a CBA. They don't, and the MLB goes, hey, guess what? We're locking you out. And Rob Manfred's exact words, I was listening to the press conference, was, we are locking out the game to try to speed up the process of negotiating a new CBA to get labor back on track, get the players at the table, blah, blah, blah. The owners went 45 days, 6 weeks, 45 days until they made their first offer to the players. Now, this is just the beginning of all of the BS that has begun to go on with this negotiations. So they go 45 days until they submit their first proposal to the players. Their first proposal hardly did anything. The owners want to actually lower the CBT more, institute a draft lottery, and extended playoffs, and not really move the minimum up much. Now, the players, what they're fighting for in this CBA negotiation, their main things of concern is moving the minimum salary up, like they always do every single CBA. They're trying to get players who are pre-arbitration eligible and Super 2 guys more money quicker because of current service time manipulation, how rosters are constructed in the MLB now, and the average player career is only 2 to 3 years. They're also trying to get the CBT threshold moved up higher because the MLB, when they instituted the CBT threshold, it was to make teams who were going to consistently spend more than the other teams in the lower end, your Royals, your Mariners, whatever. They wanted the richer teams to pay a tax to the lower teams so the lower teams could compete because of market value differences. But what it's worked as a cap where teams will only go over that threshold for a couple of years, and by year 3, when the penalties start increasing to super high levels, teams dump and they, I guess, tank to get underneath it or trade away big players and take a temporary step back. Now, another thing that the players are trying to fight against is tanking, where teams like the Tigers tanked. They had to. They tanked because of what the Cubs did, with the Cubs rebuild and how they tanked, how the Astros really tanked. And the issue is tanking works. Well, when teams tank, it basically takes out a quarter of the league. And when you take out a quarter of the league trying to be non-competitive because they're trying to boost their draft stock, it takes out salaries because you're only going to have your teams at the top who are consistently your Dodgers, your Yankees, your Red Sox. For a while in the early 2010s there, the Tigers, when Mike Ilitch was still alive, they were interested in a lot of big guys, and so on and so forth. So when they tank, it takes away a lot of teams that are potentially interested from spending money. But you can't blame the teams that are tanking because if you look at teams that try to add while they're tanking and add veterans on, 3-4 year deals, those guys are not worth maybe only like a win or two, and you're spending X amount of dollars to add minimal value to your team. So players want to try to raise the threshold so that teams continue to spend more, so there's more room for the guys at the top. They're trying to get the guys who are in the league early get paid quicker. So, you get these guys like, for example, Andy Dirks is a perfect example. I'm friends with him on Facebook. Or Andrew Romine, I'm friends with him on Facebook. These two guys played in the show, and Andrew Romine is a guy who was in the show for 10 years. He made a little bit of scratch, and he's selling houses now after retirement because, he only made so much. Andy Dirks, another one. He's selling houses now because he only made so much money in the major leagues. And he was in the show for 5 years, but, he was only had a couple of really good decent years as a fourth outfielder before, he blew his knee out, and then, he got washed out of the league. And, you think he's rich? He's out here flipping houses and stuff, bragging on HGTV. So they're trying to get these guys paid a little bit sooner, a little bit quicker. So because of service time manipulation, because of how teams construct rosters. So let's try to do this chronologically because I don't want to be all over the place with this video. So service time manipulation has been a big thing right now in the MLB. Basically, teams can hold players down for 2 weeks and then they gain an extra year of control of service time. Also, teams will send in guys up and down off taxi squads, off the 40-man, to try to keep them from accruing X amount of service time over a certain amount of period of time to gain more years of service time, so they don't have to pay them as fast. Keeps them from being arbitration eligible as quick. It keeps them from being free agent as fast. So you could potentially be a guy, say like a JD Martinez, who, blooms late and doesn't get his first payday till 29, 30, 31, 32. Well, now we go to how MLB rosters are constructed and how the owners are using this to their advantage. It used to be when I was younger, when I was a teenager, and you guys have heard me reference a lot on here talking about the teams from, 06 to 14. I can remember all those teams very well. I can remember with 06, you had very few young guys on that team. So most of those guys were vets. Guillen, Ramon Santiago, Placido Polanco, Ivan Rodriguez, Craig Monroe, Brandon Inge, Jeremy Bonderman. Most of the guys back then, rosters were built, is you had a bunch of guys that were in the early 30s who were, on the back half of their career with a couple of young guys sprinkled in because teams would pay these guys who had experience for what they did to come on and, help guys, help develop guys, help teach guys. But now that's changed. I can remember Magglio Ordonez last year on the Tigers. He got $10 million for 1 year his last year in the league. Stuff like that doesn't happen anymore. Someone who's 36, 37 years old, if you've been on a little bit of a decline, most times teams are going to, or can you, and they're going to go for the younger guy. And this is how teams are constructing teams. They're no longer paying the guy that's 32, 33, 34 years old or a little bit above because they're going in favor of, they're looking at like stats like wins above replacement. Am I going to pay this guy who's been in the league 12 years, $15 million to come on here and be a veteran, kind of like how Torrey Hunter was at the end of his career when the Tigers signed him for that couple-year deal? Now, mind you, Torrey was an all-star. He was still good. But am I going to pay this guy $10 million to come in here and be a dude for a year, and he's going to give me, say, a 1.5 above replacement? Or am I going to take someone who's making the league minimum, who I can manipulate his service time if he's doing bad? It's not going to really, I can cost me a few, X amount of time of MLB service time, and use this guy who I'm going to pay $600,000. And if he stinks, we can put him right back down in the minors, and we only burn so many days of his actual service. Or am I going to pay this guy who can give similar production as this dude who's making $600,000 as this dude making $10 million? And that is what's happened. If you look at the average age of players in the MLB, the guys that are 35 plus, they have really washed out of the league. The average MLB career, unless you were a superstar, say, these guys that are coming to the back end of their career, Evan Longoria, Andrew McCutchen, Paul Goldschmidt, Miguel Cabrera, David Ortiz when he was still playing. Those guys are going to be into their late 30s by the time they're going. But if you were like a middle-of-the-road player, who had a couple of good years in your mid to early 20s, and now you're 31, 32, getting your first payday, you're out of the league. You don't really have a chance anymore because they're going to bring up someone in their pipeline and give them an opportunity to try to fill your position at a cheaper cost. Which is going to bring me to my next point about this whole thing about what they're fighting for and some of the arguments that are being made that are absolutely driving me insane what people are trying to say. So now that we have the groundwork laid of what they're fighting for, what the owners did. The owners locked the players out. The players did not strike. The owners did not have to put a lockout on. They could have not done this. And players could be still playing right now, and they could be playing under the old agreement of the CBA for right now and going into the season without one. Now, there is a risk for a strike. I get that. But the owners did not have to lock the players out. Free agency could have continued and everything else. So they locked the players out. They go 45 days without meeting the players until the early January. They meet 7 times until this past week where they've met every single day. So let's look at some of the arguments that people are saying. And this is the stuff that pisses me off beyond belief. People go, millionaires arguing with billionaires. There's been almost 20,000 MLB players. There might have been more. I think there might be 21,000 MLB players. There's been less. than 60 $100 million deals. Less than 60 players in the history of the MLB have made a $100 million contract. Franchise values over the last 10 years has skyrocketed. You look at what some of these teams' owners who have bought their franchises in the 90s and early 2000s, what they went from, they could be in $100 million, they could have bought them for $50 million. They're worth billions now. Franchise values have gone up. Revenue, MLB every other year is beating their record revenue every other year for amount of money made. They just, with the TV contracts that MLB's making on the playoffs, they're trying to get extended playoffs because they already agreed with the ESPN on their new TV deal with that to have extended playoffs. And that's another thing the owners are trying to get in this new CBA. With extended playoffs, the playoff monies, the new bargaining agreement, and it was hilarious. The year that TBS signed the contract with MLB to extend their playoff contract with them, it was for over $1 billion. The year the owners were trying to say that they were going to lose all this money and this revenue and all this other BS, they made $1 billion on a singular TV contract. The Liberty Media just came out and said they made $520 million this year in revenue. That was after only making 120 last year, and because of the COVID year and all these people couldn't be in a ballpark and the COVID restrictions lightening up. And then Rob Manfred has the guff to get on camera and say owning an MLB franchise is not profitable. Are you kidding me? It's not profitable. What? The MLB, the record revenue is almost set every other year. They're making billions. They're a billion-dollar industry. These owners are making millions and millions upon millions of dollars. And when they sell their franchises off, they sell them for 100 times what they bought them for. These owners are not poor. Which leads me to the argument of people saying millionaires versus billionaires. And here's why it's crap. Because only the top percent of MLB players actually make that kind of money. You're looking at a league where record revenues are happening every single year. Yet, over the last 5 years, the MLB's average salary has continued to fall. Why? Because back to square one point of how MLB rosters are constructed now. Guys who are 30 plus years old don't get paid anymore because of analytics, because they're letting guys who are in the minors fill those spots because they offer similar productions, which means shorter careers, which means guys that only get a 6-year taste, collect arbitration a couple times, and they're a middle-of-the-road player, kind of like, I don't know, like Tigers example, Don Kelly, they get paid once and they're out of the league. And when they're a free agent and they finally make it to free agency, they're done. So you're talking about 5% of the league that's making that kind of money, 100 plus million. Like I said, there's only been 60 $100 million contracts ever in the history of 22,000 players that have came across the white lines of the diamond. Yet franchise values are going up, TV revenue is going up, the ticket prices are going up. So people are going to say millionaires versus billionaires, but it's really not. Your average, these guys, the dudes that are fighting for the guys that are only making the league minimum and only in the league for 2 to 3 years before they even get to arbitration or they're done or they're out. These guys, the top percent, are trying to fight for the guys that are the 0 to 3 guys that are making a little bit of money because they know how this works. Their service time gets manipulated, so they don't ever have a chance to get to arbitration to get their first actual payday. Then if they come into the league late and they finally got to the big leagues when they're mid to late 20s and they finally do make it to free agency because they have a decent enough career for 6 years, they don't get paid because they're out of the league. So they don't ever really have a chance to make money. These guys' window to actually make any kind of money is this big. That's it. They only have a tiny spot of earnings potential. That's it. And they're done. But Cohen who owns the Mets, he can make all this revenue every single year until he wants to sell the franchise. So there's a difference. You're a player, you're only going to be in the league as long as the league lets you and continues to pay you to give you an opportunity. But as an owner, you're going to make money and continue to make money and continue to make profit until you decide to sell your franchise, which you bought for maybe, I don't know, $100 million, that you're going to sell for $5 billion. So when people try to say it's millionaires arguing with billionaires, it's a BS thing. What the Players Association is doing is a necessary thing. They have to get if they're going to start constructing rosters and not pay anyone that's 30 plus years old, and they're going to keep manipulating service time of guys who are in their early 20s to where they don't become free agents till they're almost 30 because they can keep sending them up and down, and then they manipulate the service time to make them not get to arbitration as fast, and they manipulate the service time so they get an extra year of control. It's not fair. These guys only make a little sliver, and then they're done. You think about it. Say your average career, let's take an average 3-year career. League minimum is what? $675,000, we'll say $700,000. So say you play 2 years and you're out and you make league minimum. That's $1.4 million. You're going to get taxes taken out of it, and that's almost 35%. So there's $4 million off, right off the top of your money right there over 2 years. And your agent's going to get 5 to 10%. There's another few $1 million off of the top right there. Then you got to pay league dues. You got to pay clubhouse dues. You got to pay and all your other stuff. So this guy who made $1.4 million, $1.2 million is going to walk away with less than $500,000 for the rest of his life. Now, that's a lot of money, but look at how much a house costs. I live in Ohio, and you could spend $400,000 on a house like that, and you're broke. You got to go, even if you do have $400,000, say you come out of the league at 27, you have $400,000, you're not going to live off that. You can't retire off that. You don't have Miguel Cabrera money. You don't have Albert Pujols money where you're sitting there. You have to be like Andy Dirks and get a day job and invest into a business that you can hopefully sustain you for the rest of your life. Because what you did for the first 20 years of your life of playing baseball and what you trained for and what you were in the minors for, making hardly any money. Some of these minor leaguers are making less than poverty wage. That's another thing that people are going to say, billionaires versus billionaires, players are greedy. These guys are in the minor leagues for sometimes up to 5-6 years. And if you're not a bonus baby where you don't have a signing bonuses go back on, you're making less than what an average McDonald's worker makes while you're living in crappy housing. It wasn't until this year or to the last 2 years where some MLB teams are finally increasing their MLB minimums. And some of these teams are finally going to start providing housing to help these guys out. There's guys making poverty wages down there, all for an opportunity to hopefully get to the big leagues and actually make something of yourself and get there and actually make it to free agency or arbitration and actually have an opportunity to make money for this tiny bit of time. That's it. You're walking away with not that much money with the average MLB career, which is why what the Players Association is doing right now is so critical for these guys. And anyone that calls these players greedy is not doing their homework and not seeing the big picture of what's going on right now. The league waits 45 days to make an offer. The Players Association has done some wiggling and trying to make something go on with the CBT threshold, the arbitration pool. You know, they agree to a draft lottery, they agree to the universal DH. And what do the owners do? They don't want to move. They don't want to come off of hardly anything. Their increases of what the players have tried to come down and what they try to come up is hardly anything. There's nothing there to even remotely begin to try to meet in the middle to make something. It's been a joke this whole time. It's been an absolute joke. And, you know, the Players Association, they're not without their guilt, you know, with why we are where we are right now. You know, they signed these last few CBAs. They signed them. They gave the owners this power. They are the ones that agreed to play under these rules. And now they realize what they did, they screwed up. And they're trying to take back everything with one CBA. But it doesn't work like that either. You bargained for the last couple CBAs and you lost some of this stuff over the last couple CBAs, it's going to take a couple CBAs to get it back. You can't go from down here where you lose it all here in one. It's just not going to work like that. The owners have gained all this power and they're not going to give it up. And what's really infuriating as an MLB fan is that the owners are clearly not negotiating in good faith because there's been no real true wiggle room to come up to even remotely meet somewhere in the middle. And now they have till Monday, till the MLB, who instituted the lockout, who instituted this deadline. They could have did this back in December and said this was a date we have to have CBA by, but no, they purposely waited till there was a week before the spring training games were going to start to institute their deadline before they have to miss games. And it's hilarious that they say they're going to cancel games and players aren't going to get paid for those games, because what they're trying to do is MLB owners have no issue with waiting this out, because they don't have to pay the players game checks. The players know that they're losing $20 million a game, and it's going to absolutely hurt the players, especially the guys that they're fighting for that don't make that much money off the rip anyways, and you're only going to have a couple-year career. Plus, now all the guys that were borderline almost out of the league aren't really going to have a chance to get spring training invites, something like that. So all these guys' careers are over, so their earning potential is now done. So the owners are basically sitting here. They institute the lockout. They make no progress for 45 days. They institute this BS February 28th deadline and then say, you don't agree to our terms. We're basically forcing you to agree to our terms by this date, or we're going to make you miss games because we don't want to budge on our CBA. And they're purposely not coming up or trying to meet in the middle because they want to miss games. They don't care. They're trying to make the players sweat it out and hit them where it hurts the most in game checks, because they can miss X amount of games and still make enough money to be golden. They have other things going on. They're owners. They have all this money tied up in other investments. They don't need – they have a set date to where the owner's like, okay, this is going to start hitting me in the pocketbook. We have to have games by now because we need the revenue for the games. But the players – as soon as March 31st comes, they need the checks. They're not getting money. Now, the union does have a pool that they pay into to pay guys, but that pool money only lasts for so long. So the owners basically drug their feet the whole time, and they've never really had any intention of making any kind of deal this whole beginning, because they want to put it to the point of players are missing games and missing game checks, because they institute a lockout that didn't need to be done. They institute this deadline that's a farce BS deadline, because they're basically trying to make the players agree to their terms and and make them come down way more than what they want to go up. And they know they can do that by making them miss games and threaten game checks. But you know something? The players do have some leverage on this, because the Players Association already said, and the MLB said, if they miss games, they're not making them up, they're not getting those game checks. But the Players Association already said if they miss games, they're not agreeing to extended playoffs. And the owners want extended playoffs really bad. They want more teams, because more teams equals more money, which equals, more money in their pocket for revenue and all that other BS. It's another couple games they can, inflate their tickets by 100%. And everything else, because, they want it. So they sit there, the general consensus of people who are morons, who I see commenting on articles and arguing on Facebook, go millionaires versus billionaires. But if you look at it and actually use your damn brain and think about it, what's actually going on here, the owners instituted all this, and the owners aren't trying to negotiate in good faith. The owners are trying to make these guys miss games, and the owners are the ones that are making the majority of the money, while the players only have this little minute window of time to actually do anything in the big leagues before they're done and gone, and their earning power is over. They have to get a real 9 to 5, if they didn't make that much money. And it just is what it is. These guys play their whole lives for an opportunity to even get up there. And then they get up there and they get their service time manipulated. They're not treated. They're able to get sent up and down. They're able to get sent down for 2 weeks and get an extra year of control against them. And then they can be sent down a bunch of other times, because there's no limit on that, even though they were thinking about agreeing to it. It's just been all a bunch of BS. And like I said, both sides are guilty, a little bit guilty on this, but more so the owners. And if I see any more people argue millionaires versus billionaires and all this other BS, I'm just going to share them this video and they can watch me rant for a half hour because it needs to be said. This is what's going on. This is the actuality of the negotiation and why the CBA is where it's at and why the lockout's at where it's at. It's not millionaires, it's billionaires, and it's greed. It's the Players Association trying to fight for the little guy that doesn't get the $100 million contract that's only in the big leagues for a couple years and trying to keep teams from only a quarter to half of the league competing, and the other teams just straight up tanking and not even trying and limiting salaries and trying to get guys who are 30 plus years old to get paid a little bit more before they're out of the league and trying to get guys paid a little bit quicker. So, you come up and you're like a Wander Franco type guy, he did get an extension, but, that caliber player, yet you're going to make league minimum for a couple years. So if we ever get baseball back sometime in the hopefully near future, I don't think there's a snowflake's chance in hell on Monday that they get a deal done. But if we do get something back, then we can come on here and I'll talk some Tigers and what's going on. But I had to get this off my chest because I've been infuriated about it and how uneducated people are on the topic of what these two sides are fighting about and what's really going on is really annoying because they'll see clickbait articles trying to stir up stuff and it's not even the case. So that's all I got for you guys today. Have a good one.